Welcome, everyone. My name is Tristan Claridge, and I'm the convener for this webinar series for the International Social Capital Association. The association's mission is to advance the application and research of the social capital concept, and if you're interested in membership, you can check out more details on our website. In this session, we welcome Dr. Sheena Harvey for a presentation titled The Role of Social Capital for FGLI Black College Women. Dr. Sheena Harvey is currently serving as the Director for Fitness and Recreational Sports Department at the University of Nevada in Reno. She holds a PhD in Education in Equity and Diversity from the University of Nevada in Reno, and she enjoys researching all components surrounding collegial fitness, recreation, and sports, and their pivotal role in supporting student success in higher education. We're delighted you've agreed to give this webinar. Welcome, Sheena, and over to you for the presentation.
Thank you so much, Tristan. I really appreciate that introduction. And thank you all so much for making time to poke in to learn more about my research, my dissertation work. So I'm excited to take you through this journey to share the stories of the young Black women that were involved in this study. So let's go ahead and move forward. Here we go. So just to get a little bit more background on myself, as mentioned, I am a collegiate fitness and recreation practitioner. So what that means is working in higher education student affairs underneath the umbrella of wraparound services, as we like to call them, and more particular in the world of fitness, recreation, sports. I love connecting with others. That's kind of my favorite thing. I think the proof on that is remember my report cards used to say Sheena is a joy to have in class, but she talks a little bit too much. So I think that carried over into my educational journey as such, but connections with other is the most important thing to me. And as you can see, as I share more about my research, you'll see how important it was for the young Black women in this study. As mentioned, not maybe mentioned in my introduction, but I am first generation low income, so I come from that background. So thinking of that foundation really influenced the work that I do, not only in student affairs, but also too in the research work that I decided to do for my dissertation work, but also too moving forward. I am first in the family for a lot of things. First to get my undergraduate degree, first to get my master's, and first to get a doctorate. So it holds a lot of weight, but also to a lot of just very proud of this piece of setting a foundation not only for my family but also too for my nieces and nephews to show them the way and letting them know that it can be done. And then when I think about this piece of the personal experiences during my undergraduate piece, I was a member of the student employment team for campus fitness. I played intramural sports and I was heavily involved in cultural clubs on campus. So the foundation of the study actually came from an independent study I conducted back in 2019. And I wanted to see and look into to see if physical activity was a connector for African American Black women and Latino women who held the title, well, of the categorization of being categorized as a first generation low income college student. And I'm thinking I had a positive experience in it, and I was thinking it was going to be rainbows and butterflies, but at that same time, what came out of it was not things that were so, I would say, fluff. You know, I had a positive experience, but the young women in my independent study, they did not have such a positive experience in the campus fitness space. So when I think about the foundation of this study too, there's this intricate details about the entrance into higher education as a Black student, but also too as a Black woman. When we think about how our institutions are structured across the US and internationally, we have a lot of historically white and predominantly white institutions that have been structured, but we think about this piece of navigating spaces as a Black student and a Black woman. And then we talk about this social integration piece into campus life. I think about it how I think about how students come into the practitioner space that I'm in. You're either coming in with a group, you have accountability people sometimes, but also too, sometimes you're socially integrating on your own, and sometimes that's a little bit harder for you to navigate. And then when I think about my experiences in my undergraduate time, social capital was just a really big piece of being involved, but also to introducing yourself to people and to things on campus that allowed me personally to engage a little bit more with my peers and also to my instructors. So why does this matter? So when you'll see throughout the presentation and throughout kind of some of the findings of the study, that there's a double jeopardy, there's this homogenization of Black students when we think of higher education, but there's also this very important piece on the intersections of race and gender. So wanted to bring some literature to your way first before we even go into what literature was reviewed for this particular study. When we think about this double jeopardy piece, we look at Hodgkin's, and this is 2017. Black women have overcome systematic impediments that pose unique challenges to their race and gender and place them in double jeopardy as targets of oppression while they're enrolled in higher education. When we look at this piece here, when we look at this piece here of this homogenization of Black students, generally Black students are presented as a homogenous group, right? There's like this piece of Black students being a monolith. And then with the assumptions that all students have a populace share such similar cultural and economical characteristics. And then we think about the intersections of race and gender, specifically for Black women. There's an experience of difficulties for both race and gender, unlike Black men who often can abandon their Blackness in favor of their masculinity and manhood. So a lot of times Black women that are enrolled in higher ed, they're not able to do that. So moving forward here, before we get into more of the details of the research, there are some key terms and definitions of just making sure that everybody has an understanding of when the terms are being used, of where I'm coming from and how it aligns with the literature, but also to just the research in and outside of higher education. So when we look at critical race theory, as we know, it comes out of critical legal studies from 1980. The term coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. But if we look at it in the sense of this, a movement seeking to account for the role of race and persistence of racism in American society, right? When we look at critical race theory, especially in higher ed, there's the emphasis on this challenge on white supremacy in education. But as I said before, as it comes out of legal studies, there's the political piece, and then others also too looking at other social systems. When defining key terms for this research and for my dissertation work, it was important to establish knowing that first generation low income, yes, they'll lump together, and that was the criteria for the study participants. But it's important to make sure that individuals understood the term standing alone by themselves. So we look at first generation college students are historically from underserved racial and ethnic groups, along with being from a low socioeconomic background. And essentially, what a first generation college student is an underrepresented student population, so students that fall within that at higher ed institutions. So when we look at low income college students, that term itself is directly talking about a student's social class and experience with social class during their time in college, right? So we think about this, though the terms first generation low income are often used to identify a population of students, these identities are not extricably bound, right? So they can be separate, but a lot of times, if you're looking at it in higher research, you'll see FGLI a lot. But a lot of times too, you'll just see the first generation, lessly seeing the low income students being alone. When we look at social capital, many different definitions can come out of just different phases of it, looking at, the seminal work that has been done in the work in the realm of social capital, but it's group solidarity, right? We look at this piece of social networks and social ties. And then if we look at Pierre Bourdieu's theory as a result of student social class, saying that these students that come into college, their social capital may lack cultural and economic and social capital that they need to succeed in a college environment. So if you're coming in with no social capital, essentially you may not have a chance to get connected, or no one's helping you get connected, and that could really be detrimental to your time in higher education. So moving forward to share my research question before we get into more parts of the study. So the research question that helped frame the study: what are first generation low income US Black college women's perspective on the relationship between participating in collegiate fitness programs and bridging and bonding social capital? And then also two sub questions: how do they describe their social networks within collegiate fitness and on campus as a whole? How do race and gender and social class intersect in their descriptions? And then also two, what I wanted to know, how do their collegiate fitness experiences relate to their bridging and bonding social capital experiences outside of the fitness space? So, where are the first generation low income Black college women? So, upon this review of literature and really trying to seek not only just the foundation of how first generation low income college students navigate, and then applying that additional identity factor of being a Black woman, it was interesting to find that these are only some of the areas of the literature I was explored for this dissertation work. We look at this history of higher education in predominantly white institutions or historically white institutions. College universities, student body inequalities remain pervasive for racially underrepresented students enrolled. So a lot of the literature was surrounding highlighting, okay, why were colleges made, in the sense of even just the research that we know on, okay, we had historically white and predominantly white institutions and how the birth of historically Black colleges and universities came about. So it was a very interesting review of literature to see how there wasn't a lot of students of color in these spaces, but it was still the highlight of it, of keeping, excluding them, right? And then when we think about the literature that came up for on-campus experience of racial and socioeconomic underrepresented students, it's noted that Black students do have negative encounters on campus because of this piece of being less involved and are isolated. And Black students are not inherently lacking higher education institutional systems. They create the structures that trouble them. So it's this piece where it came up in this area of the literature of on-campus experiences that were racially and socioeconomic unrepresented students. It was more of the systemic and systematic things that are happening at these predominantly white institutions and also to historically white institutions. A lot of the literature review and looking at into this intersection of not only race and gender, but also to social class and higher education. When I think about, a quote or just a line from the literature that kind of really highlighted what experiences Black women in particular were having, the stress that Black women college endure can be more acute given their intersectionality of their marginalized identities. So there was a lot of things of being a Black woman in higher ed, being a Black woman in a predominantly white institution, being a Black woman, and also having these intersecting identities. And it could be also too outside of race, gender. What major were you in? What social groups did you try to attach yourself to? So it was very interesting and very enlightening to see that though there's entrance into higher ed, there's still that struggle to gain this connection just because of the intersection identities for these Black women. When we think about the role of collegiate fitness and recreation in sports, the role of importance of collegiate fitness and rec sports are unique and different, I think, in different higher ed institutions. When we think about this piece here, and it's old work, but it's important to note because a lot of this still comes up in some of the recent literature that comes up when it comes to collegiate fitness and rec. College campuses have begun to realize that these type of programs and services serve as a learning environment and as an integration space. I hate to say the melting pot or, bringing people together, and I hate to say it, but it's like kind of cliche, but it's in the literature. And these spaces are supporting more positive higher ed student involvement outcomes for students. So looking at those different areas and only tapping into a couple of them and sharing with you all, that led to deciding of how to frame the study of looking at the two theoretical frameworks that were utilized. So critical race theory, which has kind of been talked about a little bit already, and also to Pierre Bourdieu's social capital theory. So we look at the theoretical frameworks for this study. Critical race theory, as a reminder, it's a lens that supports that examination of how racialized minorities experience campus life, offer programs and how race and gender inform experiences, right? So when we think about this framework piece, and then when we get into of how we decided of what type of method to use for this study, it's important to focus on these three things, especially when we're talking about Black students and more specifically Black women. The three areas and kind of the three tenets that we're focused on for this theoretical framework, utilizing critical race theory, centering race and racism, intersectionality, and also to counter spaces. So if we go over to social capital theory and kind of want to frame it for you so we can see both sides of it and how it somewhat aligns a little bit. The social capital theory perspective shows its facilitation to understand access to resources that help form a student's network, right? So we keep talking about this access to resources. Access to resources to help activate this socialization on campus, whether it be in the classroom space, whether it be in the campus fitness center, whether it be in cultural spaces on campus. And it kind of ties back into this counter space, which is sometimes not a physical thing, sometimes it's people, right? But it's also formulated in a space to where you're creating your own environment for that. And that's what these students did in this study. So when we talk about social capital, it acknowledges the role of resources, not the individual, and then it connects those engaged to groups to somewhat some solidarity, social networks, and social ties. And the two areas of social capital that was focused on were bridging social capital and bonding social capital. So when we kind of bump back and we're looking at breaking down those three areas and why it was important to focus on that and align this with this research work, Critical race theory scholars have asserted that racism is so ingrained in our culture and US culture that is unrecognizable to most. So a lot of times it's, oh, that's just how the way things are, right? We go back to this piece of things being systematic and, being kind of just ingrained. And a lot of times in the literature, you'll see, even in higher education, a lot of things are systemic and systematic. So it's like, well, that's just the way that it is, and that's the way that it's going to be. The students just kind of have to work around it. We think about the individuals in power and positions and influence. Those are the individuals that can help dismantle the racial hierarchies, right? We're specifically talking about center race and racism. Intersectionality, right? It's clear in this study that, race and gender were a big part. So when we look at this work of Hardwood et al. And a group of researchers, they compared the microaggressive behaviors to resemble acts of interpersonal aggression that is visually identified by turning heads and funny looks. So as you'll learn in this study, these things that are coming up in the literature came up in the findings of the study too. There's this harassment by gender, racial, and class marginalization of students. And then lastly, the piece on critical race theory, counter spaces. So we think about these physical spaces, like I said before, in the sense of the study, it was physical spaces, but it also came up a couple of times that it was individuals and groups of people. So this physical encounter spaces have been known to serve as sites where deficit notions for students of color are challenged and where positive collegial racial climate can be established, right? So looking at this piece of where's the challenge, students coming in and having that form of solidarity and kind of forming their own spaces for survival as they navigate campus spaces. So we bump back over to social capital theory, right? We're looking at this perspective of how it's facilitation to help understand the resources and how students form their networks, right? Some students can go their whole college time and career and not connect with anybody and be fine, or connect on the outside looking in, right? When we look at the bridging and bonding piece, and actually for this study, I was so wrapped up in the bond, right? Of thinking of these women being Black, being women, being from a lower social class, and it was going to be the bonding that was going to allow for them to survive, right? We think about institutions and how the goal for us to get students through is retention. We're recruiting, we're retaining, we're persisting students, and we're graduating them, right? When we think about an easy way to kind of remember about bridging and bonding social capital, a bond is great, right? You think about this bond and people are together, you can move through with those people. So those young Black women moving together to get to the end, to get to graduation. You think about a bridge, it's more so you're getting through with or without others, right? You're connecting with people outside of your race, outside of your gender, to allow for this more exploratory piece. And that's truly where I think the social capital is kind of built, where you're allowed to bridge and be okay with learning things that are outside of your culture and things like that. So you'll see when we get to the findings of how the difference between some of the experiences that were bonded, but also that were bridged. Bridging networks, we talk about bridging social capital, provide access to different resources, such as allowing different groups to share, exchange ideas that contribute to this diverse interest, right? We think about, diversity, equity, inclusion, and that piece of what that means to higher ed and what that means to the college experience. Very, very important for students to help with navigation. And then we think of the bonding piece, right? And more particular, thinking about the campus fitness space. It provides students with a social bonding experience and increased connection to their university, right? So common things of being bonded by wanting to go to the campus fitness center, or wanting to work out, or wanting to go play intramural sports or things like that. So it was just very unique to see the social capital piece and what the theory is, but also too, as I said later, we'll get a chance to see in the findings of how that gets elevated. And then we put the two together, right? Looking at this connection of critical race theory and why I think it worked in this research of looking at Bourdieu's work. One can learn about macro structures within institutions, of thinking of these personal experiences and behaviors. And these two theories are not in opposition with each other, right? Instead, the result is an engagement of interplay between race structure and agency in education. So I even look at the race, gender, and social class. That's the piece that matters for this research. So giving you more about the study, so looking at the methodology, it was a qualitative research study. We used a phenomenological research design. So the central task of phenomenology, of course, is to, tell these lived experience of whatever study participant group that you have. And it was an exploratory study with iterative interviews, and it was emotional work, I would say. If you remember from before, of me giving you kind of a little bit, and it kind of explains without me having to tell you about my research or positionality of being a first gen low income college student myself, kind of really understanding that is just a different experience being a Black woman in higher ed. But being able to do the research on it was very, very fulfilling. So looking at the study setting, there was a 4-year public higher education institution. At that institution, there was about 16,500 undergraduate students in the population, so not counting the graduate students there as well. It was labeled as a predominantly white institution, and the campus fitness interfacility program and services were actually included in the student tuition's mandatory fees. So there wasn't an additional barrier for students to gain access to the campus fitness center space. IRB approval was obtained. Going through the process of trying to get individuals connected to the study, there were recruitment emails, flyers, kind of just distributed out, worked closely with campus offices that had more attachment to the students, and looking at the participant recruitment piece here, participants had to identify as US Black, identify as a female or a woman, identify as first generation low income as their socioeconomic status. The students had to have an undergraduate class standing or sophomore or above, and they must have been enrolled and currently attending the university selected for the study. So the identifying as US Black, which was kind of talked about a little bit, not trying to exclude so much, but it's a different experience if you were born in the US versus being born internationally. And I know there was some questions too about this identification of woman, female, gender fluidity and such like that. So for this particular study, this is was picked for that. And then getting a better understanding of a student's experience. So freshmen, if you were a freshman, you couldn't be a part of the study because I felt that you really hadn't experienced much yet, right? I think given a full year, and even after that, probably not much experience, but I think it was more important to get the experiences of students that were in a higher class. And like I said, work with campus departments and throughout the study, of course, encouraging the participants to share their stories. So here's kind of a quick overview of the study participant profiles. So you can see their pseudonyms, which were self-selected by the young women in the study. I call them the talented 10. I think I got pretty lucky in the sense of having a decent balance of the group. As you can see here, looking at their class standings, there were 2 sophomores, 2 juniors, and I think 5 seniors. So it was a kind of a balance of, like I said, experience in higher ed. As you can see here too, the fitness and sport participation was noted. If students were working out solo versus in a group, or working out with the group or solo. I'm looking at what type of fitness they participated in. So everything from cardio, weightlifting, a mix of things, strictly weightlifting, and then just thinking about were they participating on or off campus. As you can see over there, on versus off or both. Pretty decent mix of majors. So looking at the what these young women were studying, similar in some ways, which was awesome to hear the different experiences within their majors. But also too, as you can see, speech pathology kind of stood alone. So it was super interesting to learn how that individual student was navigating through. Same with the biotechnology student of looking at those things, and also to the accounting student. So looking at how data was collected and analyzed for the study, there was one interview session. The first interview session lasted for about 1 hour and 30 minutes. It was a one-on-one semi-structured interview, which increased the flexibility to clarify questions. And then the second interview session, questions were constructed after the first interview. So all of the data that was collected for the first interview session had to be analyzed first before the construction of the second interview could be conducted. So that lasted for about 1 hour and 30 minutes. And then the follow-up questions were constructed for particular participants. And another part of the data collection for the second interview was a mapping exercise. So in the sense of trying to learn about these young women and their thoughts of themselves beyond their time just in 4 years, 4.5 years, 5 years, however long it took them to finish out their college career, and asking them where do they see themselves in 5 to 10 years, asking them who do they see themselves still connected to, and what were the identities of those individuals too. So looking at their community connections and also asked them what their ideal campus fitness center setting was. So that was kind of a fun exercise. With that being said, the exercise included giving them a blank piece of paper and letting them go of how they wanted to draw out or write out. And it was very interesting to see some people like to draw, some people like to draw arrows and connect. Some people just like to write text, which was very, very interesting. And I really enjoyed collecting that data and analyzing it. So looking at data analysis, there were parallels that entailed immersion and interpretation. In the annotation piece, transcripts were read and reviewed multiple times. This conceptualization of the data was to eliminate or combine certain codes from the data. So coding it to make sure that, to get to this piece of how are we figuring out where the connections are. And then of course the segmented data and position it to connect to created categories, which means made the determination of the hierarchies within the data collection and analysis. So before we transition into the key findings and themes, I just want to read this quote here that's on the screen. So this is, in my early time, well before I started writing my dissertation, this is a quote that I held on to and kind of positioned up in all the areas that I wrote. And I just want to read it to you all. So Black women enrolled in colleges and university are often framed as being highly successful and resilient, which positions institutions and practitioners to believe that they don't need to provide Black women necessary support systems. So I held on to this for a long time, and not saying that all institutions don't support Black women in higher ed, but it was clear through the review of literature and just looking at just different aspects of this, and then learning too, I'll share here with you with the key findings and themes that came out of this research. It often gets overlooked. Just because somebody's doing well in the classroom space doesn't mean that they're doing well on the social side as well too. So that's essentially kind of what came out of it. And this was a really great part of literature to hold on to. So we look at the themes that came out of this research. There were racial and gendered experiences on campus, racial and gendered experiences in fitness. There was a connection to campus and community, and then also too from that mapping exercise, the future goals and plans. So we talk about this piece of the racial and gendered experiences on campus. What came out of that was the campus engagement and Black student camaraderie, and then Black student lack of access to resources. So we talk about this camaraderie not only between just students and peers and those of college age of that 18 to 24 age group. There is a sense of different camaraderie when we look at the literature, but also too, as we see in the findings, for Black students. And I want to share with you some of the words from the study participants. But it's kind of hard feeling like that camaraderie amongst like Black students because they're very hard to seek out here. And when you do, it's like, it feels like you have to be friends with them because nobody's going to understand the Black experience like them. And so that's kind of hard. I feel like, but I found my group, I found my people. Some of them are Black, some of them are not. I don't hang out with exclusively Black people. Because you can see here, Tiana talked about where you kind of, nobody else is going to understand. So it's kind of like, well, guess I got to connect with the Black people. But at that same time, it's like, okay, well, at least I know they understand kind of maybe what I'm going through as I navigate this predominantly white campus. Moving forward to the Black students' lack of access to resources. So I feel like when you're a white student going to a predominantly white campus, there's no struggles, there's no navigating. You're just in it, you just know it. But the way that some things are set up where we have to jump through extra hoops, we have to go out of our way to find these resources, we have to join all these special clubs, organizations, because that stuff just doesn't come easy to us, and we're just treated like we're a special breed. So Ari, it was really enjoyed interviewing this student because this student had intersecting identities of not only being a Black woman, but also gender identity, gender fluidity. So this individual felt like not only they were navigating the lack of resources on campus, but also just trying to figure out themselves and who they were as a person. So continuing on with the racial and gendered experiences on campus, students, a lot of the study participants talked about that Black student well-being and what that meant to them, but also to the Black stereotype and the gendered experiences they experience on their college campus. I'm probably not probably. The mental health aspect of certain things have definitely caught up to me in a way that I wasn't expecting. I've always kind of struggled with mental health for as long as I can remember. Like I especially like anxiety, and that eventually like trailing into depression and whatnot. And I can remember distinctly like my freshman year, I had a really good handle on things, and at least I thought I did. So that was Jasper. Jasper was a senior, right? So recounting this piece of how far she's come, you know, thinking of the times and the struggle she had as a freshman, and then even kind of just recounting it now, you know, in her senior year, was very, very brave of her, number one, to kind of have that transparency and kind of vulnerability in the space. But for her, it seems like she had kind of coped with it, but also too, I think it still crept up on her every once in a while. The next quote here, in lining with the Black stereotypes and gender experiences, but it also, just like encountering so many ignorant people, is a challenge because, like, some people, they just see Black people as like the strong, like, I can say anything to you as I hurt your feelings. Like, they say wild comments and then they're like upset when you're like, oh, that's disrespectful. That's racist. Like, don't do that. And so it's hard. So once again, another senior B talking about of how openly her non-black peers, and I remember this having this conversation and answering the question of, you know, this societal stereotype that black people are just tough and you can just say whatever, and not only do we have thick skin, but you know, just do whatever. So it was very, like I said, emotional at times to hear these students talk about these experiences on campus. So moving forward, and let's move to the piece of this racial and gender experiences in the fitness space. So we talked about, right, this gender, race, and fitness, the intersection of those two things, but also too in the fitness space. And then what came up a lot is the body type comparison. As you'll see through some of the quotes from the students from the study, talked about this comparison to white women bodies, being in a predominantly white institution. So being of a small group, so then you go to the gym space, but then you don't see a lot of folks that look like you, but what you do see is not your body type. Like I kind of realized that there was really no talk about fitness in the Black community. Like usually if we talk about anything, it's about food. Thanksgiving, you know, we don't really talk about obesity rates or anything like that. And my grandma, she has diabetes, and my mom, she's pre-diabetic. She got diagnosed pretty recently. And so, but I was like, you know, I never really heard of, you know, a Black girl going to the gym. And that was Amy. So Amy was a junior. She was an accounting major. She actually changed her major a couple of times, and she was set on accounting, but you know, maybe not shared in this particular presentation. When you have a chance to read my dissertation, she talked about her arms being scrawny, and you know, and when she talked about not really knowing of Black girls going to the gym, that was a barrier for her. She's like, well, I've never known of it, so why would I go? I'm just like, why can't I get like that? He was like, you have to understand, girl, you're Black. You're gonna have a very different structure for them. Like, you notice all of them are white, like, you know, and like you have hips and like the butt, but you're not gonna have your upper body is gonna be more muscular. You're gonna have more of a wider torso. You're going to have that skinny itty bitty waist. You're not gonna have that skinny itty bitty waist, but you're gonna have a wider torso, girl, because like you're people from Africa. So Sophia, an individual, sophomore at the time, she was, I believe, a marketing major. And this particular quote is from an instance to where she's working out with a Black male peer, right? So though it's someone that's in the group, we think about this bonding social capital piece of having somebody to go to the gym with, but in this instance, it's like just because you're Black like me, you're still criticizing my body, right? So there's this gendered experience in fitness to which, in a way, reading through and even just in the remembering being there, sit at the table with this student interviewing, it was they were very like, well, I don't know if that was a compliment or not, right? So for that student to say that, I'm like, well, that's a gendered experience. So it was very, like I said, at times hard to hear these things, and then sometimes the students trying to make it a positive, but ultimately it wasn't. So we think about looking at the study in fitness intimidation and unwanted attention. You know, just going off of here, I'll only read one of these. So if I've had some experience in the gym where I'm just trying to grind and some guy is kind of trying to talk to me, I don't want to talk to you, bro. I just want to focus on my workout. And I know that's kind of a problem that a lot of women have when they're just trying to work out and they're just like, man, I just want to do what I need to do and not be bothered, right? So this came up multiple times for this piece of not only being intimidated by the fitness space, but also to gaining this unwanted attention from male peers, and oftentimes it was white male peers. So being fat in like a fitness environment is the worst thing I've ever experienced. I would much rather be called a slur than join any of the classes, join any of the clubs, anything associated with fitness. And that's coming from the deepest depths of my uterus. So Ari, as explained earlier, sharing the multiple identities that the student held. The student also shared not only the fitness intimidation piece, but the student shared times where because they were a heavier person, they didn't feel comfortable getting on some of the machines in there. So not only is it a being in this worst, the fitness environment is the worst thing I've ever experienced. There were multiple things for this particular student that just did not sit well. Um, and then we have here, I was really scared and hesitant when I first went. It was intimidating, especially the first floor. You would never catch me on the first floor, and I found it was a common thing. So you'll see this come up a lot in the research of the first floor kind of being the where they lift the weights and it's kind of the centerpiece. And oftentimes the participants will talk about, well, there's a lot of white men down there, so I really don't feel comfortable. And then if I do go with friends, I'm staying with my friend group the whole time. So it was interesting to see where things align, but also to just the different experiences from the students. So we move forward to talk about this connection to campus and campus community, which a lot came up in peer support. And we look at the difference between what was the bonding social capital experiences, what were also the bridging social capital experiences. So I think a positive experience has been actually finding the Black people on campus. I've met so many different people, just like anybody, you click with some people, you don't click with others, and most of them are really supportive. And I was just starting to meet all these Black women, and I was like, oh wow, this is cool because I was not around Black women as much like my first semester of college. So looking at this bonding connection, as if we look at it for this particular research study, the bond was race. Looking at Elle even talked about it in her quote there, looking at their like more closely in my like within my social identity. Talked about a girl she met in her class who was mixed like her. And then we go over to the bridging social capital side, right? I find it very interesting that the groups I'm leaded to are predominantly white sports club teams. I was the only Black person on the team. Martial arts, I was the only Black person there. I'm the only Black person in all my criminal justice classes. So even just with Mamba explaining of being the only, that didn't defer her from wanting to still participate. So that came up kind of a lot too with a couple of the other participants. Is like, well, this is something I want to do. So we talked about that bridging piece of getting students through, getting to the finish line so they can graduate from the institution with this whole student kind of makeup of not only did I excel in the classroom, but also had a chance to socially engage with my peers, which would seemingly is very important. So we look at this campus connection to campus and community. We look at campus student services, which is highlighted and also can be referred to as student affairs at college campuses. So we look at the bonding social capital piece here. I met my best friend there, Lori. So we both got hired there at the same time. And so I like worked there. I kind of like got to talk to the staff and like the employees and stuff. And then it kind of just became a comfortable space. And then like I realized that there were people there that I could depend on and like talk to and give me good advice and like, just good people to be around. So what B is talking about here is actually her experiences working as a student employee on campus. And a lot of that came up in the study. A lot of students were attached to campus through student employment, which we know and learn through research, but also through sometimes our own work, that's the transferable skills. Not only are these young students taken into, their careers they're going to end up in after graduation or into graduate studies, but also to just into their daily living. So it was really refreshing to see the positivity that came out of this. As you can see here above, Mamba just talked about there's her connection to the campus multicultural center as well too. More so going to events that were culturally based. And she said, and here's a big thing because the school was founded on their land. And so that was very important to see. So she shared kind of just her joy of knowing that there were other cultural things happening on campus, not necessarily for Black students, but also to just this entrance into learning about Native American culture. And bridging social capital, I'm a little involved in Greek life, but I'm not in a sorority myself. But like I said, I have the connection to that fraternity. So when they have like some philanthropy events, I help out with that, which has been really fun. And then like I was saying earlier, I'm going to join the nonprofit organization here on campus that's going to also be open up a lot of doors for me, I'm hoping. So as Jasper talked about, right, and we think about and what we know about students in their senior year, they're looking for internships. They're looking for what's going to help me kind of close out my college career. So not only her and Alana being attached to the student clubs and organizations that were related to campus, but also to the community, allow them to bridge their social capital so they could have access to resources or seemingly now gain more access to resources on campus, but also to off campus as well too. So looking at the future goals and plans piece and really kind of digging into the data that was collected for the mapping exercise, kind of the four things that came out of that were how students saw themselves living. A lot of them talked about owning homes or, you know, buying land or doing those things. Students talked about their future jobs and careers and finances, kind of all in line with each other. They talked about their social networks for the future and what that support looked like. But they also talked about the marginalized identity group member support. So thinking of for the people, the question I asked, what are you going to do in 5 or 10 years? Who is going to get you there? And what are the identities of the people that are going to help you get there? So this was one of my favorite parts about doing the data collection for this study. So pulling some feedback and kind of a quote here from Mamba, who was a junior criminal justice major. And then for 10 years, the people I can talk to would be like to buy a house would be my high school counselor. She's been homeless, and so her first investment, as soon as she got a job, as soon as she became a counselor, was to make an investment on a house. And that speaks a lot to me because I was also surfing. I'm also a surfing homeless teen. And so that's something like to invest in a house. As you can see here, the influence of someone that is mom has been connected to for many years. But leading the individual that she's connected to, leading by example. So her seeing that it can be done, though she was a homeless teen that was surfing couches, to know that home ownership was a thing that could be done for her as well too. When we look at the future jobs and careers and finances, Tiana shared, okay, I would say my professor in grad school and speech pathology friends would help me get to the point of working as a traveling speech pathologist or working at a public elementary school. The people that may be able to help me get there are those who come from similar communities as me with similar circumstances and goals. Those who might already have more knowledge than I do are willing to lend me their support. So Elle was a student worker on campus, developed, these social skills to help her not only connect with other Black students on campus, but students that were not Black. But more so, I think super proud of Elle to step outside of the box, to be more open, but also to just kind of connect with everybody. And I think where she saw herself moving forward, knowing that it could be, yes, people that look like me, but also people that didn't look like me. Excuse me. And then lastly here, the marginalized identity group systems member support. So B shared about her friend Don. So Don is gay, which I feel like it's like a part of his personality and like a way that he is just so like charming and like out there. And like everybody loves him. And he is also like has introduced me to a lot of things that I probably wouldn't have known otherwise, probably like played into like the way that I express myself now as well. So not only was Don a close friend, but it seemingly from the research study and kind of some of the things that B shared that they were more open now about who they were as a person, having a friend that they were so close and connected to that allowed them to kind of come out of their shell more. So, like I said, throughout the mapping exercise is very, very refreshing to see these things come out for these young women. And then moving forward, what came out of that too was this reframe of the strong Black woman stereotypes. When we think about the strong Black woman stereotype, there's this physical, emotional, and intellectual piece that's connected to it. And oftentimes through the study and talking to the young women, there was a lot of times of them knowing that their physical appearance, they would say that it was intimidating to people, right? And then it's just like they're thinking to themselves emotionally, I have to live with this, that people fear me and they don't know me. Or people are saying to me, oh, well, I thought you were going to be mean and I didn't know how you were going to be because of some societal kind of depiction of Black women. And then there's the intellectual piece. Like I said before, just because these women are striving in the classroom doesn't mean they're thriving socially. So there's an intellectual piece I think is all kind of intertwined with this Black woman stereotype and how we can reframe it. So I wanted to share this a little long, but Alana, who's a senior, I think she summed up this reframe. So I've always been like taller and I'm like bigger than like all the friends. And then on top of being all those things, I'm also Black. So it's kind of like this. Like there's like this manly stigma that are placed already on Black women. And then I'm 5'10". And then it's like a lot, you know? So not that I've even like, I guess, used that part as who I am. I've never gotten into like a physical fight or gotten to a point where I had to fight because just my presence or me just speaking up about it or talking to you directly about it was more than enough, right? Then at this stage in my situation, when I would speak up for myself, things would get better until they weren't better anymore. At first, it's like, okay, when I speak up for myself and I don't get the outcome I want, what do? Oh, I ignore you and I show you that you're not bothering me. But then when that doesn't get the reaction, what do I do now? Do I break and show you that I'm not weak? Show you that I'm weak, or do I say something to try to get you to stop? So to me, this was such a powerful quote coming from this young lady of just kind of going through all the things about her and her identity and her experiences of, I'm supposed to be strong, but it's, going back to even something that B said of like, well, you just can't say anything to me, and you're already intimidated by me because I'm tall and I'm bigger than everybody, right? So there's just this opportunity to kind of reframe the strong Black woman stereotype, and I think Alana's words speak to that, but also to a lot of the other women in this study spoke to this in many ways. So, finishing up here and looking at the discussion implications for the study, we think about the major findings and their connection to the literature. So, there's that intersectional racial and gender experiences that these women experience, the intersectional racial and gender experiences and fitness. The peer support was kind of brought out of the findings, the bridging and bonding, campus support services, bridging and bonding, but also to that future plans and goals for these young women. So we look at the intersectional race and gender experiences. There's the access to resources, the well-being piece, the mental health. We think about it in fitness, right? There was a lack of representation, and then of course that direct intersection of race and gender. Peer support, when we think about it, there's this intersectional approach to engagement, which allow for this focus on identity specific experiences, right? We talk about the Black women in this study, but then also too, the campus support services. There was connection to cultural and first generation student centers and spaces. Talk more about the multicultural center piece, but also through the study, because this campus that the study was conducted at had a first gen center, that was another resource, campus support. And then we think about the role of administrators of color on campus, right? We talked about this physical space for this counter space where students can come together in solidarity or even just feel safer doing their homework or even talking and asking questions. But we think about administrators of color on campus and this kind of unwritten rule or kind of role that you're the place where students can go and help make sense of their experiences. And I've felt that for myself too at my institution. We look at the future plans and goals. There was marginalization on all levels for these Black women. And though first generation students often possess this form of social capital from parents, friends, relatives, right? You think about you're leaving a village when you're the first, right? And oftentimes there's a little bit of support to go on and do something. There's also that pressure back home of, well, you can't leave us behind, So there's that piece of what came out of the findings for the study as well too. Theoretical implications. We think about the study contributions. I'm going to give some practical recommendations from the study and also to some considerations for further research. The contributions of this study, how first generation Black college women can gain social capital. More specifically, the task for this study was to see if collegiate fitness and recreational sports was lending a hand in that. And there was a lot of racial and gendered experiences, but I think oftentimes too, it allowed for these young women to see themselves and be a representation for the students that will come behind them. There was a confirmation that a counter space serves as a space of survival. I think that was very clear. And then there's that piece of bridging and bonding for Black college women in the campus fitness space, and also to on campus as a whole. The practical recommendations is this piece of practitioners, campuses, institutions of really looking at this piece of in and out of classroom experiences, and then noting too of thinking of what additional cultural competency training could be conducted for instructors. One of the quotes, I think I brushed over it, but Mama talked about being the only one all the time, right? And even talked about being felt that if we're talking about Black stuff in class, why is everybody looking at me? Or why is even the instructor calling on me to get my feedback? Classroom success does not equal social and emotional success. And then looking at this piece of higher ed institutions, looking at the sustainability of Black sororities, organizations, etc. There was a lot related to the Black Cultural Club on this in particular campus of how that allowed for students not only gain access to other Black students, but also to what was said to learn how to be their own Black within the Black group. So I think that was very powerful. So organizations matter. And then lastly, just the recommendations for future research for this particular study. And I have a really long list, but these were kind of the three, looking at students that are in their graduate studies and looking at family structures, right? All first generation low income students don't have the same family structure. And then because I'm obsessed with it, an ethnographic study approach I think would be pretty awesome to kind of put a spin on this type of study and things like that. So. In conclusion and closing, this is one of the few studies that utilize social capital theory for Black women in this context. Black college women are often overlooked outside of intercollegiate varsity sports. So if you notice, and I didn't list it, but students for the study could not be student athletes. Institutional support structures need to grow in their support not only for Black college women, but for students of color as a whole. And then, of course, always knowing that there's going to be this important and different lived experience for students as when there is intersections of race, gender, and social class. And then lastly, the study, though it's centered on first generation Black college women, but the call to action is for all of us. So social capital is not just about who you know, it's about who knows you belong. So thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Here is my virtual business card if you want to scan to stay connected, and also to the left on the screen, my left, my email address for directly, and that's the department that I work for at the university. So thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Sheena. Fascinating presentation and really interesting research that you've done. So we'll have some questions and answers now and a bit of discussion as well. Feel free to either raise your hand, which you'll find under the React button within Zoom, or alternatively, you can post in the chat. When we get to you, I'll call upon you to unmute yourself to ask your question, and feel free to follow up with some additional follow-up questions or other comments as well. If you're not in a position to ask the question yourself, feel free to let me know in the chat and I'll ask the question on your behalf. So I've got a few questions popping up already in the chat, which is really great to see. I might see if I can get in quickly with a question first, if you don't mind. It's a methodological question. I often use two interviews, the same sort of process that you use. So I'm interested in your reflection on what led you to choose to have like a follow-up interview, and what your experience with that was. I certainly find quite often participants come along to the second interview raring to go. They've been reflecting and thinking about things from the first interview, and they're often almost hit me straight away as soon as we get into the second interview, and whether you found a similar kind of thing. And I'm particularly interested in what led you to that methodology in the first place.
I think it was, first of all, I had to learn how to say phenomenological. I think that was that was part of it. But I think it just even just going through my work and my master's of looking at ethnic minority students and how extracurricular activities does enhance the college experience. So I think when I was very focused on this work and, deciding on not only, the methodology going to be used for the study, but doing the two interviews, really looking at a lot of literature that I read about Black women, and I knew this is going to be unique. I was like, well, we got to get as much as we can, right? And knowing my role as a researcher, knowing my identity, my intersecting identities, of having a chance to be more intimate with the participants of whomever was going to be a part of the study. And I knew one interview wasn't going to be enough, not only with validity, in research of like, if you're doing qualitative, a lot of times that one interview piece is not going to be enough, right? Not doing a longitudinal study of following, right? I would want to do another interview, but just because of the time frame, and of course they say a done dissertation is a good dissertation. I think elevating and adding that mapping exercise brought also to back of not only them answering the follow-up questions from the questions they answered from the first interview. I think it just enriched the data for the study. And like I said, this was, we think about how much we leave out. There was still so much that I could have reported, but I think that second interview really kind of just not only formulated the structures and stories for the young Black women in this study, but it kind of gave them their individual kind of role at the university, and even a little bit of how each one of them were leaving their mark some way, somehow. So I just think that, having that opportunity to do that second interview, follow-up questions specific to each person, and then on top of that, doing the mapping exercise just allow for me to have a better pool of data to structure for the research study.
Yeah, and it's important, isn't it? Like I imagine in the second interview, people were getting more relaxed, they're getting more into
Oh
it.
yeah.
And when we think about what habitus is in general, it's pre-reflective. So it takes time to reflect and dig into it and think about it. And that second interview, I guess, is an opportunity. And that's what I was saying. Like I often find people come along to the second interview and they're all ready to go with things that they've been thinking about since the first one. So I think it's a great methodology. So let's get into some of the questions that are coming up in the chat. I think the first one was from Cam Ferguson. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. Cam, are you there? Feel free to ask your question yourself, or I'll be happy to read it out on your behalf if you prefer. I'll read it. Feel free to unmute yourself if you want to do any follow-ups. So Cam asked, have you thought about replicating this study in HBCU? That might be interesting.
Yeah, actually, I have, and I kind of mentioned it earlier, even though you won't see a lot in my literature review, but of course it came up a lot of the role of HBCUs for Black college women. The work that I do as a practitioner in collegiate fitness and recreational sports, heavily involved in this piece of uh, being attached to an organization within the unit of this governing body for collegiate fitness and recreational sports, and there's a big focus on emerging these young leaders and more specifically students of color. So I think it'd be super interesting to do this work. I actually got to present it at an Emerging Rec Sport Leader Conference at a HBCU at Howard University, which was awesome. And it was, I didn't, I didn't even think for a second that these same issues essentially were happening not only in the predominantly white institution space, but also to an HBCU. So I would be super interested to conduct a study similar to this at an HBCU. I think that'd be great for everybody.
Yeah, great. Jennifer asked if you can pop your contact details back up again,
Oh yes.
just so she can grab those details. We'll move on while you're doing that. We'll move on to the next question, which was from Simmons. Feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question, or I'd be happy to ask it on your behalf.
Hi, Dr. Harvey. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay, so the first off, great presentation. Was very informative. The question I have is, what can K through 12 educational professionals do to assist and or prepare young Black girls who plan to attend college?
That is a great question, Simmons. Thank you so much. I think it's kind of go back to this cultural competency piece, along with, we in the study talk about critical race theory, and it gets talked about across higher ed. I mean, there's this seemingly this dismantle of it. When I think about it, there's culture responsive teaching that can be done in the K through 12 space. We think about it's not this piece of direct instruction to this group of students. I know for sure if instructors can have that cultural competency to know that there's different lived experiences from students from different backgrounds, that's going to not only prepare that student to be more ready for college, but I think also to creating this pipeline situated to where we're not sending students off to college with culture shock, right? I think if it's early access and recognition of, a lot of high schools that I've learned across the US, there's this piece of they're more college preparatory. And I think along with that piece of, yes, prepping them to go to college, prepping them to write a paper, there needs to be prep for the environment as well, too. Learning the racial demographics of what institution a student could go to or they have their sights on. I think that's the work that needs to be done. And I think there should always be, I mean, I'm a little biased of the social capital piece. Not only are students, involved in clubs in sports and things while they're in high school, and it may be an in-group thing, right? But I think the early attachment or even just learning what the difference between bridging and bonding is in K through 12, and why that matters, I think that's something that K through 12 can assist with before students enter higher ed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It certainly seems like a really important piece. I mean, it is a great question, what can we do to prepare students for college? And it seems like in part it could be through, mentorship type programs once they get there, but also perhaps having, like you said, maybe some of those preparatory kind of pathways where there's opportunities to be exposed to the college environment before even getting there. So some way in which you can have a limited amount of exposure or activities that occur on campus for kids that are still at school, and that way they're starting to, it's breaking down a lot of those uncertainties and starting to get that exposure and that familiarity with the kind of things that happen on campus, and that may help as well, I guess. But I think it's an important question because clearly there's a need to change the way we're doing things now to improve the experience for people on campus, perhaps. Should we move on to the next question? I think the next one was from Beth. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, Dr. Harvey, thank you so much. I work with students in community college and increasing their social capital literacy and also transferring. And I'm curious, after your research, if you had a daughter who was deciding where to go to college, would you feel, well, of course, there's so much of a matrix, but do you think an HBCU would offer so much more connection opportunities, in terms of all the isolation that the intersectionality of marginalized categories? Sorry, you kind of understand what I'm trying to ask.
Yes. Yeah, no, great question. And I live on both sides of it because I have people in my life that are like family and that I love. And I'm always asking, you had a chance to go in HBCU. Was that a better experience for you after? Because the individual I'm talking about is my sister friend, Gregret, and she was at HBCU and then she transferred to a predominantly white institution. And there is a difference, right? I think it's, talking about myself. I mean, I'm Black every day, right? So yes, it's great to be in an environment to where I get to see beautiful people that look like me. But is that staggering what's going to be my, assimilation or transfer into, if I'm going into corporate in a particular field, is that honing me down? Is that keeping me down from having these experiences with different cultural backgrounds and things like that to go into a office space to where everybody's white but me? The HBCU life is great, but when I have to go into corporate or I have to go into the hospitals or I have to go into education, depending on where that job is, I think there can be a little hindrance of that piece. But at the same time, I've had experiences as a practitioner and seeing the outside looking in into, if I had a daughter, it'd be great for her to go to HBCU, right? But at that same time, like, okay, what is her field of study? Is she going to be going to graduate school? So I think it's a lot of components and complexities to it, but I think that's a great question, because HBCUs have a lot of great things for Black students, but also too, at the same time, I think predominantly white institutions, and maybe there needs to be like a bridge or partnership of student exchange to where students can get the experience from both before deciding the whole 4 years. Yeah.
I have a follow-up question, and because one of our students, she got into some predominantly white institutions and is looking at going to Prairie A&M in Texas, and for a variety of reasons. And I wondered if, with HBCUs, do you have any sense that there's a social capital network that extends from one HBCU to another, right? I was just wondering if, for example, other schools have a lot of alumni networks, but I wondered if she might have access to an HBCU social capital network. Any clues?
I don't know too much about it, but that's something that I would love to look up as well. But what I do want to say about this social capital piece, especially at HBCUs that I've learned, and somebody on the call may be able to answer this better if they currently work at an institution like that. Administration matters, because what I learned at Howard University presenting kind of the same research was that if there's still this piece of division, or you're you're in the group but you're not in the group, that's that. And I think it's Cam said they can share information about that. But yeah, I think administration matters. I think depending on some of the mission and visions of different departments and things like that, that's going to be what's going to allow that student to thrive, whether it be HBCU, PWI, predominantly Black college. And then also too, I think Jennifer Bishop said they can contribute well too to the HBCU question.
Thank you so much.
All right, let's go to David next. And then we'll go to Anisha, and then we'll go to Jennifer next after that. So David, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question. You there, David? Oh, we can't hear you, so I'll ask the question on your behalf, and feel free to follow up if you can. Were the research participants aware of the importance of bridging social capital, and did they recognize its potential to reshape their perceptions of isolation?
Oh, that's a really good question. No, because there was no, because I didn't put it in the questions in the first set of structured questions. We didn't talk about those terms. It was more so of trying to align it with the theoretical framework to see if that's what it was. Like I said, I was so stuck on the bonding piece because they were Black women. So I said, oh, the bonding piece is easy, and not really seeing the bridging aspect until we got into more of them answering the question. So that's a really good question. Yeah, it wasn't framed as this is a study about bridging and bonding. This is, what are your social networks? How are you connected to campus? Who are the people you're connected to? So that was, I think, the highlight of it as well. So that's a really great question.
And I heard someone earlier say social capital literacy, and it seems to be a term that's being used more and more often, and it seems to be an important piece that perhaps that's part of the preparation that we could do through the schooling system, is actually help people with their social capital literacy, so they're understanding the importance of bonding and bridging social capital, and the importance of social relationships and being socially connected in general, perhaps, is part of this piece. So let's move to Anisha. If I'm pronouncing that correctly, feel free to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hello, I'm Anijah. First I want to thank you, Dr. Harvey, for presenting this. I'm a FGLI student as well. I'm currently an undergraduate student. And so I think I've observed that with these sorts of like topics and the things that you like find and like that you found through the study, that you can conclude kind of like you can't make it matter to other people, but you can still make it visible to other people. So my question is like, how would you advise people to like make this information visible to other people, especially in a way that it doesn't feel like targeting or like it's somehow like, I don't know, like a act of like, I don't know, force against people, but more so just to make it visible so that like universities or institutions can understand and can be able to, act accordingly, I guess.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that question. And, big up to FGLI students. We know how to figure things out. So with that question, I think for myself and hopefully next steps, and something that I've been thinking about and kind of talking to some other colleagues that have kind of already started this. I think if it will be accepted in a less, I don't even know the term for it. I think the academics piece has to be included with it. So I have this idea of formulating like a first year experience course um, at predominantly white institutions for Black college women, right? And I say this because when I think about even just the identifying factors of the participants, not saying that I don't love women student athletes, it's just when I think about the other and the outliers, and when we think about how many Black students are total at a predominantly white institution, and then you shrink that down. Okay, you take out all of the student athletes. Okay, you take out all the males, right? And then what's that number look like in this piece of where you're at institutions? Was there 20,000 students? So if institutions are into it, I think it's important to have this opportunity to bring this small group or seemingly could be a larger group together in an academic space for a semester to talk about not only the social capital piece or how to navigate this. There's other things that can be intertwined with that as well too. So I think that's the way to deliver it. That's one way to deliver it. But there's many other ways too. Women of color collectives that have come up of different institutions and having practitioners come in from different areas on campus to talk to these students that have similar identities, but also too, as myself as a researcher, any and everything that I try to do, I try to put it out there in different settings of just so you know, this is what it is for FGLI Black women in higher ed, right? So I think it's a lot on individual work, but also to group work. I think it's sharing peer-reviewed journals or contacting people that are doing the work and asking questions to inspire the work to live on as well too. So
Thank you. I appreciate that. I would redo my freshman year just for the first year experience course. But, yeah,
yeah,
thank you.
you're welcome.
It sounds like a really great idea to introduce it in that kind of way. And I think that's the challenge we so often have with research, is that we need to find a way then to be able to communicate it without the loaded academic terminology that perhaps people don't understand. And that's such a critical piece of it. So let's go to Jennifer next. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Thanks, Tristan, and thanks, Dr. Harvey, for your presentation. It definitely hit home with me. As I said, I kind of researched a similar area, but focused on senior executives in the financial services arena, because I am that. So, and of course, looking at the lens of social capital and social network. But I really want to address Beth's question about the HBCUs. And I can tell you, as being a single mom of two daughters who pretty much went to predominantly white institutions, say from 0 or K through 12, I mandated that they went to an HBCU for college. So kind of reverse, Dr. Harvey, of what you were saying, to ensure that they were able to get that experience. And I feel that college is definitely the formative years. And I am a member of a sorority. So I do know the importance of that social network and that social capital. And having spent 20 plus years in banking and moved to a senior executive position, there's no way I would have been able to do that without social capital and social networking, both from a bridging and bonding perspective. But I would say that for the young lady that is looking at an HBCU experience, and I could just say for my youngest daughter, who went to an HBCU for undergrad and then went to med school back at a PWI, it definitely helped her to navigate both arenas. And now that she's leading an area in a hospital here in North Carolina, I think that was extremely helpful and valuable. But I teach at Fayetteville State University here in North Carolina as an adjunct. So I know kind of the camaraderie, the connectiveness of having that support system from a HBCU. And as you had mentioned, even in your research, even at PWIs, because I'm a product of a PWI, undergrad, master's, and even my PhD, as you can see. But still, that level of connectedness, even when I was going through the program, I felt like being on an island. I was still
Yeah.
the only one in my cohort. I was still the only one. And then I'm researching, and you have to think this was pre-2020 and searching African-American women. Now, post-2020, I say the George Floyd effect, then my research became wanting to know throughout the school, but prior to that, it wasn't well received. And then now, 5 years later, we're back here where DEI is a bad word. So I think from that instance, any young senior, I would promote them going to a HBCU to have that level of support, that level of connectiveness, and then working with, say, other, like as you said, they're looking at their graduation and internships and being able to have that. And I love the idea of partnering with a predominantly white institution to be able to get that level of diversity that's needed and that social capital that's needed. Because when you go into these corporations or these industries or education, you do have to have that groundwork of being prepared. So I just wanted to address that question about the HBCUs and leaning into social capital, both from a bridging and bonding perspective.
Thank you.
So we still have a little bit of time. If anybody has any other questions, feel free to either post in chat or raise your hand. Such an interesting and big topic to explore. I'm sure there's lots of questions and things you'd like to explore. Certainly lots of comments coming up in the chat, congratulating you and thanking you for your presentation.
Thank you all so much.
So I will say the association is going to hold a conference in Dubai in 2026. So we'd love to see lots of you submit abstracts or come along to the conference in Dubai. There's more information on our website about that. Beth just raised their hand. Feel free to unmute yourself.
Yeah, Dr. Harvey, thanks. I'm glad I didn't get to ask my original question because I had other questions come up, but I'm really curious about your mapping exercise because I'm wanting to do that with our students this year. And so I was just curious, like, if you could give us any details, if it was purely future focused or if it was also like identifying your present networks and how you saw those playing out for the future. I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, it was more future, and it was more so to see were they going to be still aligned with the things that came up for their bridging and bonding piece of looking at, because like when I talked about the bonding piece of the social capital was more race driven, because they were attending the PWI. It was like, okay, well, let me at least connect with the Black students because at least they kind of know what I'm going through, right? And it was, and yes, some of it was gender, but more so of it was race. And then the bridging concept was, okay, how do I step outside of my box? And that could be within any realm of the identity. And how am I connecting with these students? And if you remember, Jasper continually talking about this connection to Greek life. And in this particular institution, Greek life was predominantly white. So thinking about the Interfraternity Council, the Panhellenic, and there were historically Black sororities and fraternities on campus, but it was very small. So for Jasper to continue to talk about, well, it's kind of an unexpected connection, but I'm glad that I did it, right? So when it got into this mapping exercise piece, it was very future focused to see, okay, all of them have made it clear that they're going to graduate. Like they're like, okay, graduation is going to happen. There was this interest of, okay, what's next though? And it's not that it has to be you have to continue doing great things and things like that, but the way that these young women were kind of formulating their stories and their lives and who were the people that they were connected to and how that gave them confidence to navigate spaces and create these counter spaces. It was very important, I think, to show what the future held, what they thought the future held for them, right? So I'm more than open to sharing some of the images with you. I can show you, of course, of removing, any identifying things, but also too the set of questions that were kind of asked. And like I said, it was pretty simple in the sense of where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? Who are the people that are going to help you get there? And what are the identities of the people that are going to get there? So when I say identity, for some people, that just meant race. For some people, that meant what is their race, what is their gender, what is their sexuality, what is their whatever, right? So I kind of left it that way to see how detailed they would be in the explanation of the people. You know, we go back to Mamba talking about the connection with, you know, her seeing that she was gonna buy a house and how she wanted the information or was driven by somebody else that was homeless like her in their teen time, right? So for me, it was just very, very interesting to see the different things. And like I said, too, giving them a blank piece of paper, and I put out pens and I put out markers, and some students were just like, oh, I just need this one pen. Some were like, yeah, let me get that purple one, let me get that orange, let me get that black, let me show you what I think my future looks like on paper. So, but I'm more than welcome, Beth, to share that information with you through email and such.
Yeah, that's great. Well, we have a little bit of time for any final questions, but to get them in really quick if you do have a question. No, I think we're good. Well, thanks very much, Sheena, for that. It was a really fascinating presentation. Excellent research that you've done as well, and it's really great to hear about it. Our next webinar is going to be on Native American college student perceptions of social capital development through Facebook. That's on the 4th of June. That's next week. I've posted a link in the chat for anyone who wants to have a look at that and come along. All of our webinars are free, and our association is run by volunteers. It'd be great if you could, everyone could get involved, perhaps check out the conference, our community platform, and all that kind of stuff. It's always great to host different webinars. Thanks again, Sheena. That's excellent.
Thank you so much. Take care, everybody.